Welcome to What's New in Palo Alto Networks VM series integration with VMware NSX. This session is a deep dive into our integration. My name is Sai. I'm from the product marketing team at Palo Alto Networks. I primarily focus on security for the data center and private cloud initiatives at Palo Alto Networks. With that said, let me go ahead and call out Nitya. Nitya, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nitya Nateshan. I'm a technical marketing engineer with Palo Alto Networks, and my primary area of focus is private cloud security integrations like NSX. Really excited to be here with you all today.
Thanks, Nitya. So a couple of quick things, housekeeping duties before we kind of get started. First thing is we do have a microphone at the very end. Please leverage that when you're asking questions. This session is being recorded, so let's make sure that the people who will actually listen to this session afterwards have the opportunity to listen to your questions. Please hold on to your questions until the end of the session. We will definitely answer most of them. And if we don't get a chance, we'll make sure that we can connect with you offline and answer those. So with that said, I wanted to just do a quick show of hands in terms of how many of you know about Palo Alto Networks. Okay, it's about 50%. How many of you have had hands-on experience with our integration with VMware NSX? All right, okay. So maybe we need to give a very short introduction before we kind of head into the details. This particular session was intended to sort of go into more details about what we have done over the last 12 months. But I'll definitely give you a very quick overview before we get started on this. So first things first, just a very quick overview of the agenda. We're trying to keep a theme of rock climbing. It's an interesting theme, and we wanted to sort of show some of the challenges which we faced as we did this integration and how we actually overcame those challenges. What I will do is I will kind of give you a very high-level overview of the journey so far. Many of you might not realize, but our integration with VMware NSX is 5 years old now. So we actually did this integration back in 2013. So I'll kind of walk you through some of the things which we have done, some key checkpoints over the last 5 years in terms of how this integration has matured, how we have actually achieved some of the key value propositions associated with security for your software-defined data center together with VMware. And once that's done, we'll focus more on some of the key enhancements which were done. And these enhancements really, more than anything else, were often asked over the last 5 years. People have actually talked about them. People have sort of wondered, will we ever do this? And this is not specific to Palo Alto Networks, but in general to any virtualized offering in the market space. And then we'll kind of get to the meat of this presentation, and that is new features. We'll focus on 3 key new features which were introduced over the last 12 months, which are very unique to us, which also bring a lot of security or advanced security into your software-defined data center. We'll finally close out by giving you some pointers in terms of some best practices, and also give you some insight in terms of new use cases which we are seeing now beyond the software-defined data center. The software-defined data center, securing the software-defined data center with VMware NSX and Palo Alto Networks VM series virtualized next-generation firewall is a well-understood sort of use case for a long time. I would say, as I said, for about 5 years now. But beyond that, we are seeing now the extension of security into your remote locations, into clouds. And we'll talk a little bit about what some of the customers who have actually embraced this, what are they doing, and what these use cases are all about. And finally, of course, we'll have some time for Q&A. So with that said, let's quickly talk a little bit about the journey so far. And while I'm actually talking about this, I'll give you a very quick overview, given the fact that we actually have some folks out here who are very new to this integration, what exactly this integration is about. So about 5 years ago, back in 2013, Palo Alto Networks and VMware got together and started looking at what's the best approach in bringing advanced security into a software-defined data center. VMware NSX, of course, was fundamentally changing the way you created and you actually built a software-defined data center from a virtualization standpoint. They were also, of course, very much invested in bringing the best security into the same data center to protect you from advanced attacks. So Palo Alto Networks and VMware got together and they charted out a methodology which effectively has become pretty much a template today for any sort of service insertion within NSX. So what they did was, you'll see the very first instance, and that is, back then, a virtualized next-generation firewall actually leveraged NetX API integration. When I say NetX API integration, NetX is the mechanism, it's the framework which VMware NSX exposes to other vendors so that they can leverage that to integrate directly into the hypervisor and be able to see traffic directly before it hits the virtual guests. The NetX integration was the mechanism for service insertion, and of course, more importantly, the ability to manage security policy updates in an automated fashion was the crucial way to tie advanced security services into VMware NSX. And these two goals were achieved back then in 2013. And the way it was done was VMware NSX has security tags. Tags were an abstraction to tie a group of VMs or a group of address objects together. We have something similar on Palo Alto Networks. We actually introduced a new feature back then in 2013. It's called dynamic address groups. What dynamic address groups did was it actually mapped those security tags from VMware NSX into our management platform, thereby giving you the opportunity to build security policies based on those security tags. So you're completely decoupling away from network constructs such as IP addresses, ports, protocols, and basically building the policy literally by saying application A can talk to application B, security tag A can talk to security tag B. And that was the mechanism which was sort of leveraged and built. And you will see some of these examples in the demos which Nitya is going to go through over the course of this particular presentation. Since then, we have actually introduced a whole slew of features. And as I said, this journey has been long, arduous, and interesting, and definitely very fulfilling for a large number of customers. The first one was secure multi-tenancy. This was introduced as a way to bring multi-tenant overlay on top of your NSX environment. How many of you actually are familiar with VMware NSX? Right. So VMware NSX, of course, is the network and security virtualization platform which actually runs on top of your data center. And what it essentially did was it brought together the opportunity to fully virtualize all the networking constructs which you can basically put on top of your virtualized compute, VMware ESXi, and be able to manage the network seamlessly using their management platform called VMware NSX Manager. Now, the NSX Manager leverages those security tags which I talked about to actually quantify and sort of build a posture around each and every workload which you're running inside your virtualized compute. For example, you have a group of Linux workloads. So you can actually create a tag, security tag called Linux, and actually associate that with a whole bunch of virtual machines. Now, obviously, this model is very well designed for a single large monolithic enterprise. But when it comes to multi-tenancy, which essentially is becoming the norm in large enterprises, you want more granular separation. You want the ability to be able to quantify a specific set of tags, a specific set of workloads for a particular group, a subdomain, a department, an sub-organization under the enterprise. And you also want to secure that group by making sure that their traffic is not exposed to others, by making sure that their log information, whichever you're collecting for that particular group, is not shared or viewable by other groups who are leveraging the same infrastructure. And that is secure multi-tenancy. The secure multi-tenancy was a big use case, very common in healthcare environments where you want clear separation. And that was something which we actually implemented together. And since then, we have actually done more. We have actually broadened the portfolio of virtualized next-generation firewalls. I'll talk about them in the next upcoming slides in terms of what are the different options you have out there. We have done significant performance enhancements, and we'll spend some deep dive on that performance enhancements. We will actually show you a demo of these performance enhancements which we have done. And then I'll actually touch upon some 3 cool new features which have been introduced since then, and that is, One is alternative security policy lifecycle workflows. It's a mouthful when I say that, but you'll actually appreciate it when I show the demo to you guys. The more interesting and very, very relevant feature out here is the automated security actions feature. Now, this is very relevant today because you're seeing so many cyber attacks today, which are overwhelming any team which is trying to manage the security posture of your enterprise within your data center. So you need some sort of automation to help you do that. And that's exactly what it actually introduces. And we'll talk about this. This is very unique to Palo Alto Networks, and which we take a lot of pride in. And we have actually seen very interesting customer proof points which prove that this is very useful, especially for lean IT teams, small teams who are trying to manage large amount of infrastructures. They can leverage that feature quite well. And finally, we'll kind of round it off with scalability. Scalability is always the big thing which people talk about. And this is interesting. What we have seen over the last 24 months is the sort of the emergence of enterprises deploying multiple NSX managers. Not one NSX manager, more than one, 2, 3, 4. And dedicating NSX infrastructure with its own dedicated NSX manager to a particular organization or a sub-organization. So letting them do their own thing. Now, when you have that kind of fragmentation, you want to make sure that your security policy is consistent across all these different deployments. So how do you do that? And that's something which we'll take a look at the very end. So with that said, I want to take a quick pause here and sort of get more into the details about what was available for the last 4 years. And what are the different options you had? And this is independent of NSX, by the way. This is tied to VMware ESXi infrastructure too. If you actually talk to any security vendor in this market space, if you actually talk to anybody who's actually leveraged a virtualized network service, a couple of things quickly come up. One is it always gets compared to a physical device. That's the first thing you get to see that. Because naturally you have a tendency to say that, well, I have a physical firewall. How does this virtual firewall compare to it? The second thing which you normally notice is, what are my choices? Do I have flexibility just like my physical infrastructure? If you take, for example, physical firewalls, you have multiple choices. You have choices with regards to an instance which you can run for your remote offices. You might actually have the choice of a very large monolithic appliance which you can actually deploy in your data center. So you have those varied choices in terms of portfolio when it comes to your physical firewalls. The question immediately arises, do I have the same choices when it comes to virtualized firewalls? And the answer to this was woefully very short until about 2016. Our choices which we offered were these 4 options you had back then. And they were all of the same performance envelope, in the sense that all of them were pretty much capped at a performance of 1 gigabit per second. So they couldn't scale beyond 1 gigabit per second for you. Whether you deployed it in a very small footprint environment or whether you deployed it in the largest of the large data centers, you only got 1 gigabit per second. So what was the differentiating factor between all those 4? It was purely capacities. It was a case of number of sessions which it could handle. How many active sessions we could secure at any given time. That was the differentiating factor between all those 4 instances. Now, with the recent introduction, we kind of broadened that portfolio. We kind of made it much more aligned with our physical firewall portfolio. So you can quickly see you now have 5 different performance points and 5 different models available for you. So starting at VM50, 100, 300, 500, and 700 totally comprise our virtualized next-generation firewall portfolio. This is quite similar in terms of performance to what you see on the physical firewall side of things. The 50, of course, is targeted for remote office, branch office locations, and the 700, of course, goes into very large service provider environments or data centers, large data centers. Now, at the same time, we were very cognizant of the fact that there are existing customers who are leveraging this. So we wanted to make sure that the transition is seamless for them. As I said, we've been doing this for the last 5 years. So there are a large number of customers who are actually leveraging the existing portfolio as it is. So there is a very seamless mapping which happens to those customers. So if they had a VM100 and a 200, it automatically inherits the same feature functionality and performance envelope of the VM100. The 200, which used to be available before, is actually slower than the one which is available now with the latest software release. And this transition is seamless for you. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the design considerations you need to take into account when you do that migration, assuming you are an existing customer. The same applies for 300 and 1000 HP too. Performance-wise, we start at 200 megabits per second. We go all the way up to 16 gigabits per second. So you have a lot of flexibility in terms of the choice of performance points when it comes to your virtualized next-generation firewall. Again, this gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of where you want to deploy. Some examples which I can share you, very common in retail, in remote office locations, is the VM50. The VM50 is a very low footprint virtualized next-generation firewall, something which you could run in a simple ESXi host. And the more interesting aspect of the VM50 is it actually can be run on top of shared CPU resources. So you don't need to actually have dedicated CPUs for the firewall itself. So you can share, it actually takes 1/5 of your virtual CPU. Similarly, as you kind of go to the right, you start seeing the performance envelope starts increasing, and of course, you need to allocate more resources to achieve that. The use cases generally which we see is from 50 to 300, very common in distributed enterprise and also data centers, and more of the 500 and the 700, very commonly deployed in service provider environments, very large deployments, also in very large data centers too. Now this, of course, is the VMware ESXi portfolio. The equivalent of this when it comes to VMware NSX is from the middle of the pack. So we actually have the 100, 300, 500 available for you when you start running them on the VMware NSX. You can immediately notice out here that the 50 is missing and the 700 is missing. Why? 50, as I mentioned, has a very low footprint, and its applicability within your core data center is probably not relevant. And that's one reason we decided not to necessarily expose that. The 700, yes, it gives you very high performance, but at the same time, it also consumes a lot of compute. You actually need to allocate quite a bit of CPU resources to that. So given the kind of shared responsibility and the shared model which exists in a virtualized environment, it doesn't make sense to actually deploy a large virtualized next-generation firewall which is needed for every ESXi host in an NSX environment to actually consume so many resources. And that's one of the reasons why it actually has not been included as a supported version at this time. Performance-wise, you see 1 gigabit to 3 gigabit options. These are, as I mentioned before, this is a 3x jump compared to what we were offering before. We'll kind of delve deeper into why this performance envelope exists on the NSX environment. So with that said, I do want to quickly give a very short overview of some of the interesting changes which we have done from a licensing standpoint too. We kind of simplified how you can order these, how you can leverage them within your NSX environment. First thing is we actually created bundles. Very simple bundles to choose. Bundles which actually help you easily sort of size the security needed for your data center. So you have 3 options. The basic bundle only comes with a support included in it. The second bundle, the bundle 1, essentially includes threat protection, which is the typical IPS posture which you want to implement within your data center. Generally needed for your compliance requirements. For example, you're looking for making sure that you're trying to meet some of the mandates put in place from a corporate standpoint, as well as, for example, PCI requirements, things like that. And finally, the last bundle actually includes all the subscription services which we offer today on our firewall. They're priced at a very lucrative price point to actually make sure that you actually have flexibility when you go down the path of choosing that bundle. Now, the key thing which you get as a part of that bundle is Wildfire. So Wildfire is our cloud-based threat intelligence service and protection service, which what it does is it actually protects your network from known and unknown threats, cyber threats. And you can actually get that subscription if you go ahead and buy the Bundle 2 environment. Again, the simplicity aspect of it out here is that when it comes to choosing the right posture for your environment, you simply go ahead and pick one of these bundles, and you can actually buy that particular bundle and deploy it in your environment. The key thing to note out here is these bundles are completely agnostic to your deployment scenarios. For example, you have public cloud deployments, you have private cloud deployments, you have remote office deployments. These licenses are completely portable across all these environments. So that's one key thing to note. The other thing to note out here is there is only a single authentication token tied to these bundles. So for example, if you buy 20 instances, you'll still get only one single authentication token, which you can leverage to basically deploy these instances. What's the big advantage of having a single authentication token? For example, if you have a DevOps kind of an environment in your enterprise, you're leveraging CI/CD, continuous integration and continuous deployment scenarios. You want to fully automate the deployment of security. You actually are leveraging automation mechanisms such as Chef, Puppet, Ansible, and you want to actually automate your security along with it. A single auth token helps you seamlessly integrate that and deploy and bring up these instances wherever you want. Also, given the kind of scale which you envision from a security standpoint when it comes to the VM series virtualized next generation firewall in your data center, you also want to take into account enterprise licensing agreement. So we do actually offer you a no true up, no clawback option of enterprise licensing agreement, which is completely unbounded, offered in 1 3-year terms. And the great thing about it is the management, the virtualized management offering, Panorama, is free. It's included in the bundle for you. What this gives you is it gives you the option of deploying the virtualized next generation firewall within your data center, within your public cloud environments, without worrying too much about sizing upfront. So this is something I would definitely urge you to consider if you are forging ahead in terms of securing your software-defined data center. It is very, very competitive. It's not like some of the large ELA programs which currently exist. The other thing to note out here too is we do offer the bundles which I showed you earlier as a part of your VMware enterprise agreement too. So you also have flexibility in choosing how you actually end up deploying these bundles, either through VMware agreement or you can go with Palo Alto Networks and get our enterprise licensing agreement too. So with that said, let's touch upon performance. Performance has always been a pain point when people talk about virtualized environments. People talk about virtualization and then say, but it is not the same as physical firewalls. It's not the same. It doesn't scale. And I showed you some big numbers out there. So let's see how we achieve those big numbers. So when we start looking at what's inside our virtualized firewall, you'll start seeing some of these key things which we have done over the last 12 months. First thing which we did was integration of Intel's DPDK. DPDK is Data Plane Development Kit. It is a software library which Intel offers, which is designed to optimize virtualized instances running on top of Intel CPUs and be able to get the maximum performance out of your virtualized environment. So it's a pure software edition. It doesn't require you to invest into any hardware. And DPDK integration is a crucial first step towards achieving very high performance with any network service, including security services, when it comes to performance within your virtualized data center. So we did that. First thing was we actually incorporated the Intel DPDK integration into our firewall. The second thing which we did was we added support for PCI pass-through. So this is a very common scenario where you invest into very high performance network adapters running on top of your ESXi host, VMware ESXi host. You want to make sure that the I/O bandwidth on offer through these connections are fully utilized by your virtualized instance. So you can actually pass through those NIC adapters directly into the virtualized instance. So we actually support a range of these adapters now. SRIOV is one other sort of overlay on top of the PCI pass-through mechanism. What is SRIOV? The same NIC adapters which you see today, they can be virtualized at the NIC level itself and be exposed as logical instances to your virtualized guests. And that also gives you very high performance because it's almost like the NIC, the physical NIC, is available to you inside your virtualized guest. So we also support that. So that feature got added. Beyond that, we actually did a significant amount of optimizations on CPU pinning, support for NUMA, huge pages. Now, these are all, of course, quite a well understood sort of options available for achieving high performance on large virtualized environments, and we now support those options for you directly from the security standpoint. Collectively, all these four options come together, effectively offering you very high performance in your virtualized data center. So some design considerations as you kind of go ahead with these different options. First things first is Intel DPDK is enabled by default in VMware ESXi. You don't need to do anything. So the minute you actually spin up our virtualized next generation firewall inside your VMware ESXi environment, DPDK is already there, and it'll try to leverage that to achieve high performance for you. In the event it's disabled, you can actually go ahead on the console and actually enable that. There's also support for multiple queues in VMware ESXi. We urge you to enable the support for multiple queues because remember, we are now fully multi-core and multi-thread enabled. We actually support so many of those threads. As a result, the benefit of high performance can be derived by turning on the complementary features on the VMware ESXi. So get into that VMX file, edit that, or change the advanced settings to reflect the high performance requirements of the virtualized next generation firewall. You can actually leverage NUMA infrastructure. For example, if you have large deployments where you have 18 core CPUs in your environment, you can leverage NUMA and, of course, CPU pinning architectures to scale further up horizontally and get high performance in those environments. Definitely, I'll urge you to use validated SRIOV and PCIe adapters. We actually test them all the time to make sure if there are any issues, we actually sort them out. So you can go to our website, you can find a list of them listed in the documentation, use those adapters to achieve that high performance. So with that said, I want to quickly jump to the demo and show you a very quick overview. Now this demo actually has nothing to do with VMware ESXi. It's actually got nothing to do with VMware NSX. But I want to actually show you something which Intel tried out on our virtualized firewall, just to sort of give you an idea in terms of what you can expect on the VMware ESXi. They actually ran this on top of OpenStack, which actually has, of course, only Open vSwitch available with optimizations. They actually enabled DPDK, and they ran our virtualized firewall on top of it. And what I want to do is quickly jump to how this test compares between before enabling DPDK and after enabling DPDK. Now this test was being run, so you have actually 5 different configurations. Without going too much into each detail of each and every configuration, look at the middle one, the one which is marked as best. That's the best configuration purely from a virtualized next generation firewall perspective. With that configuration in place and no DPDK enabled, what you quickly see is with all those features turned on, you run the performance, we're able to achieve about 1.7 gigabits per second of performance on that particular virtualized next generation firewall. But the key thing to note out here, and I want to urge you to take a look at that, is the CPU utilization out there at the bottom. It's 87%. It kind of varies between 60 to 80%. So what is happening out there is very high CPU usage is happening on that particular instance to achieve that performance. Now, let's go and actually shift over and enable the DPDK and run the same test. What you will quickly see is, yes, you have a huge performance jump, almost 3x performance jump now. You're achieving 5.1 gigabits per second on that middle column. But more importantly, your CPU utilization is only 22%. That's the key optimization, which is very relevant to your virtualized environment. It effectively gives the opportunity for your virtualized environment to leverage those CPU resources for other virtualized workloads in your environment. So that's the huge gain you get with these performance bumps. You might not necessarily need the high throughput needs, but the advantage of leveraging the DPDK gives you, with a low CPU usage footprint, you're able to secure your environment. So with that said, I would like to take a quick pause here and jump over to some of the cool features which we introduced in 8.0. The first one which I want to talk about is the alternative security policy workflows. Until recently, you actually had to execute 5 steps to actually enforce advanced security policy within your VMware NSX enabled environment. So you actually had to create security tags, you actually had to create dynamic address groups on the Panorama, which is our management platform. Then you had to go and apply those tags to your workloads. And then you had to create advanced security policies on our Panorama platform. Then go back again and create redirection rules to make sure the traffic actually comes back to you. These 5 steps had to be executed on 2 different management consoles. You actually had to execute it on Panorama. You had to execute it on VMware NSX Manager. Now imagine this for a security admin. He has a split management model. So he's looking at 2 different management consoles. He's also looking to manually manage the policy lifecycle. Imagine you want to decommission some of these security policies. You need to jump back and forth and make sure that everything is synchronized for you. And more importantly, the chances are you might actually go through all these steps, but for some reason you make the mistake of, let's say, not enabling the redirection rules at the very end. Your security policy mandate, even though it looks like it's actually been deployed, is not being enforced. So there are possibilities of loopholes in your security posture when you actually have to go through these 5 different steps from a manual standpoint. So this is what existed until recently, and we've kind of taken a different view of actually doing this. We have actually created an alternate approach so that even though this approach is fully functional and available for you, let's see a different way of doing things. Nitya is going to walk through a demo right now and show you how that actually feature works. Nitya, go ahead.
Thanks, Sai. Let's switch gears a little bit here and talk about panorama-driven workflows, or the alternative workflows that Sai talked about. For those of you that are familiar with our Panorama Management UI, this is how it looks like. And all the security posture begins at the Objects tab and Dynamic Address Groups that also Sai touched upon earlier. So a typical use case, or in deployment models, you will see several tiers like app, web, DB, and categorized into production, development, QA, and things like that. So throughout my demos, you'll see examples like that. Again, it's not hard and fast. It depends on your deployment environments. So having said that, let's see how we can leverage security-driven workflows in Panorama. So like I said, it begins at Object tab. What we do here is create an add and then do an address group. You see how I'm creating QADB DAG and choosing the type to be dynamic. This is a very important step in the security-driven workflows. Your type has to be dynamic, and your match criteria should start with a single quotes _NSX_, and then you copy-paste the same dynamic address group name and end it with a single quotes. So any security posture, any automated security posture begins with this step. Now what I'm doing here is just clicking OK and committing to Panorama. So previously we did not have this. We used to go to Panorama, create something, and then go to NSX Manager environment and create a security group separately, and then start tagging them both together and things like that. So with the new workflows, however, you configure it only in one step and from within Panorama. Now, when you update or refresh the NSX Manager screen, you're seeing the QADB DAG getting automatically populated. I didn't have to go ahead and create it myself manually. So you see that getting created, right? So this is one step where you create security groups very automatically from Panorama, and it gets reflected in NSX Manager. Now let's look at policies, right? You have the security groups, you have the workloads and everything, but you still need to redirect traffic to third-party solutions like Palo Alto Networks. Now how is that automated? This is the second piece of the puzzle where you start creating security policies within Panorama. Again, for those of you Panorama admins, this is a very familiar UI. You choose source destination and you provide app ID related stuff when you create policies. So I'll let the demo run through that. And I'm using the DAG that I previously populated. And the DAGs always have the _NSX_ match criteria to dynamically start populating things in the NSX side of things. So in this example, I'm going to give MySQL app ID and finish creating the policies here. Now when I commit to Panorama,
so Nicha,
yes.
talking about this, here the security policy, I'm guessing, is built based on the security tags from NSX Manager and the applications which are tied to it, right? It's got nothing to do with IP addresses.
It's got nothing to do with IP addresses. You're not pinning any IP address or ports or protocols or anything of that sort. It's purely workload based. So that's exactly where you define your dynamic address groups and go from there. Now, this is a very cool step where I created a policy, right? And then I still haven't done my traffic redirection. It happens in a single click under our Panorama tab at steering rules. So it auto-populates, it goes ahead, looks into the dynamic address groups, it goes ahead and looks into the policies that you created using those dynamic address groups and actually auto-populates the redirection rules. Right? This is the traffic redirection rule. You saw some NSX options there as well. So once I commit after this step, you would see it correspondingly in NSX Manager, where it creates the redirection rules. So this is your NSX Manager screen. I refresh here. I'm seeing a specific section called PAN underscore rule for QA. And the rules that I created to go from app to DB, DAG is also reflected here. And I'm also seeing it getting redirected to Palo Alto.
So, can you pause out there once? I just want to sort of bring this up, and I want to know. So, we actually saw 5 steps to execute for any security administrator in trying to build a security policy, and they need to jump back and forth between NSX Manager and Panorama. What you're showing to me out here is you can execute majority of those steps directly in Panorama, and it will do the job of synchronization with the NSX Manager.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I'm talking about. So all you need to do is just open up Panorama dynamic address groups and open up Panorama and do your policies for redirection. And everything gets auto-populated in NSX Manager.
What happens if I remove a security policy from Panorama?
It would go out of sync, and we would show you that as well. So you would click the out of sync button and you would see that, hey, your security rule or a steering rule is out of sync, and you sync it. And we've also given options to bring it back into sync. So in the further part of the demo here, I can show you how this would look like. See, in this case, I'm actually showing that a steering rule is out of sync. And you're also given option to bring it back into sync with the action column here. You can sync dynamic objects and also sync NSX config to make sure they're both on the same page. And we have made it very easy with 8.0 release.
So this approach is going to make sure that the security posture is consistent across NSX Manager as well as the Panorama at any given time.
Absolutely. That's how we reinforce it. So, well, that's the end of the demo, and I'll give it over to Sai to continue the next portions.
So I'm going to quickly jump onto the second use case out here, which is a very interesting one, very relevant, especially among teams which are very lean IT teams, network teams, security teams who are actively looking to automate most of their infrastructure, especially on the security side. So automated security response is a feature which was introduced recently, which gives you that ability to take action automatically when you see some kind of an alert. I'll give you a quick walkthrough, and then Nitya is going to walk through your demo to show you how it actually works. First thing is you see a lot of logs. Security administrators live and breathe logs. They will see logs associated with threat alerts. They will see logs about different traffic abnormal patterns. They will see logs from antivirus. They will see data filtering logs, system logs, you name it. All these logs are being vetted. People are going through those to make sure that they're relevant, irrelevant, they're actionable, non-actionable, so on and so forth. Now imagine a deluge of these logs coming to you every day. You have 150 other things to do, but also the job of looking into these logs. And this is exactly where this feature comes into play. And what it does is you look at these logs, you identify a set of logs which you feel are logs which we should take this set of actions. You have predefined set of actions or custom actions which you have defined associated with these logs. You can tie those logs to those particular action and enforce them automatically without actually going to a manual to the interface, clicking, choosing those, and actually executing any kind of action. And there might be cases too where your action might be simply a case of triggering a service ticket. You might want to say, for example, you're leveraging ServiceNow, and you want to open a ticket based on a log, an alert. But it's a process, it's a manual process. Imagine what you could do by just automating this. Let's take an example and see how it actually works out here. Imagine a scenario where the virtualized next generation firewall quickly saw a log arriving from 10.3.4.122 saying that it is trying to talk to a command and control server external to your network, in the sense that it has been compromised or actually has some malware on it. What you can do is you can actually define an action by saying quarantine that, by telling NSX, move that instance automatically and put it into a quarantine zone. So you actually can define a policy like that. There could be other cases too, of course, which you have different options which you can do. Now, as I mentioned, NSX is not the only option. For example, you want to open a change management ticket. You can actually interface with ServiceNow. We can actually interface with any service which leverages REST API. As long as it's using JSON REST API-based infrastructure, we can interface that and we can trigger an action on those. Now, this feature, of course, is pretty powerful. It simplifies the job of essentially keeping track of any major alerts and taking action on them. Nitya is going to go and walk through a demo and showcase this for you right now. Nitya, go ahead.
Thanks, Sai. So this is a very powerful use case that we have seen so far, and this came as a direct customer ask, and we enabled it as a part of the product release as well. So what you're seeing here are some policies that actually talks about any to quarantine, allow any to quarantine drop. The first two policies talk about how you can use remediation tools when you allow traffic to go and inspect your infected hosts and VMs. Now, any to quarantine drop is a policy that talks about drop the traffic, cut it off from data center and things like that. Now, we'll see an example with WordPress, which is a typical application, web application that spawns web pages for you. So these are the set of policies that I've defined out here to showcase this. Now, fastly move forwarding here. So there is also a HTTP profile that we set up. And this is talking directly to NSX manager URL. So once I edit the profile here to show you, this is actually the IP address of your NSX manager. It talks to it in a HTTPS port 443 and talks about your credentials as well. In the payload format, you would actually see the threat level is set to NSX threat high. The traffic is set to NSX data violation. All of this we pull using NetX APIs talking to NSX manager directly, and there are varying options for that, which you'll see in the later part of the demo. In terms of the log settings that Sai was talking about, you get n number of logs from very many sources. Now, if I have to set the threat level to medium or high, I can do that. And that's all I really do in this, from a configuration perspective. Now let's look at one such threat setting, right? There are several predefined formats that we can leverage. And some of the examples that you're seeing in the screen is, of course, coming in from NSX, and you also see some ServiceNow related integrations. So this really talks about the power of Panorama being able to integrate with multiple sources to detect and quarantine a host, and also open a ServiceNow ticket if need be. So these are some examples. Again, it depends on your specific configuration itself. Now, looking at our simulated brute force attacks here, I'm going to launch SQL root password brute force attack. It's a simple script that runs with multiple passwords to my MySQL server. Now, I've launched the attack. Let's see how Panorama reacts to this attack. It first detects the threat and starts logging in. Logs are a best place to see what happened. So this is how a Panorama log looks like. You see that it's a vulnerability. It comes from MySQL authentication brute force attempt. It classifies it. It even tells you the IP address of the attacker and places it at a high severity at this point. And once the logs are seen, it's automatically forwarded to NSX Manager using that HTTP profile that I was showing. And you can see how the security tags are already automatically assigned, and it indicates that it was a data violation to the server. And now this particular client is put into quarantine mode automatically. Now, when I try to return to my page and try to access the web server, it's no longer accessible because it's a compromised workload and it's quarantined successfully.
So basically, the the HTTPS response model of automation is triggering a message to NSX manager telling it that this particular client has been compromised, move it into a quarantine zone, allow only administrators to talk to it, and no other traffic should arrive to it.
Absolutely. So this is all seamlessly done under the hood. I didn't have to go and manually look into it and start pulling it into quarantine mode and everything. All I needed was a basic trigger, and it matched, and Panorama spoke to NSX manager, put the host under quarantine mode, and disabled access to that machine.
Awesome. Thank you, Nitya. So again, this is a very powerful way for you to automate security responses within your environment. It's very flexible. You have some predefined options today, but you also have the option to customize this and leverage it within your environment. Now, with that said, I want to go to the last use case out here, and a new feature which is being introduced right now. It's in beta. We actually have customers who are trying this out as we speak. We should be shipping this for general availability soon. And what this essentially is you to scale beyond a single NSX manager. So I'm going to quickly sort of show you some use cases which are driving this particular new feature. Commonly seen in recent times has been this tendency by large enterprises to deploy multiple NSX environments at any given time. The scenarios could be disaster recovery, and you actually have a DR deployment in place, you have a full infrastructure being managed with NSX Manager, which is active, and you also have a passive environment, which is housed in a different data center, again managed by a separate NSX manager. You also have a scenario where you actually have development, test, and production environments completely separated, and each one having its own NSX manager. Other scenarios could be mergers and acquisitions. Organization acquires another company, and they actually want to spin up a separate NSX environment for that particular sub-organization and manage it separately. You might actually do this for specific flexibility, for isolation from the standpoint of, for example, in M&A case, until the merger and acquisition is closed, you want to make sure that there is a separation of information. But your requirements from a security posture perspective are exactly the same. The corporate security posture is always a standard one. You want it to be extended across every environment in the same fashion. And that's exactly where our ability to now sort of tie into this multiple NSX manager comes into play. With a single management platform, Panorama on our side, we can actually connect to multiple NSX managers and push security policies to all of them. Keep them synchronized without necessarily in any way impacting your security posture across these diverse environments. So I'm going to ask Nitya to actually walk through this demo and sort of explain in detail what exactly we are doing under the hood to achieve this functionality. Nitya, go ahead.
Thank you, Sai. So the topology that we are looking at is multiple sites, just a single panorama. This was not possible before. Again, this is under beta, like Sai mentioned. If you were to use the released plugin, you won't get this feature. It's a very special feature that's coming out soon, and it's currently being beta tested by some of our customers. So you have multiple sites. I'm just giving an example of just two sites, Site A and Site B, managed by a single panorama. And you have multiple NSX managers in this case, a couple of hosts, and very many VMs as well. So this is the overall topology. Now let's look at how it appears from within Panorama. Again, this is the option for VMware NSX. Again, if you have a plugin, again, let me step back and explain about the plugin itself, right? Like with our 8.0 release that happened earlier this year, we realized that PanOS was a little bit heavy to accommodate for NSX-related changes, which was happening at a much faster rate. So we took all the code that was relating to NSX, decoupled it with our PanOS release. Now we are able to churn out faster releases. So with the multi-NSXPs that I'm talking to you about, you will see that as a plugin update. You can have your own PanOS version running in your environment, but all you need is a newer plugin to enable this new feature.
So you're saying that without requiring any forklift upgrades, you can actually get all new features now without disrupting the existing deployment. All you do is you just simply upgrade the plugin, and immediately the new features are available to you.
Absolutely.
And so there is no disruption to your business at any given time from a security standpoint.
Absolutely. You don't have to plan any downtimes for it and things like that. So it's literally a soft upgrade of the plugin, and then you get all your scalable targets achieved. So this is how it looks like. For both the sites, I've put them under a common parent device group. This is a very important setting to implement shared policies across multiple sites. Now I have a same network zone name for across both the sites, Site A as well as Site B. This is also a very important configuration step to achieve shared policies.
This might be common in disaster recovery designs, I'm guessing.
Absolutely, absolutely. You need your same security posture for multi-sites managed by multiple NSX environments. So in a Site A data, I have one cluster, a couple of hosts, some web servers, some DB servers. This is just an example. I have one SVM per host. I have two hosts here, so I have two Palo Alto Network SVMs here. Let's look at how NSX Manager looks at the first site. Now, service definition, this is actually pushed from Panorama. You'll see Site A Palo Alto Networks configuration coming in through that single panorama. And in the installation pane, you'll see that SVMs are up and running, the installation is succeeded, and things like that. Now let's look at firewall configurations and everything. This is a clean slate, by the way. So I started fresh. There is nothing configured here in the redirection rules as well as the security groups. Similar configurations you will see in Site B as well. It's a fresh configuration. You will see, in this case, just one host, just one DB server and web server. These are multiple sites. I'm going to configure similar policies for both sites and push it from a single panorama. That's the use case here we'll be talking about. So again, it's a service definition will show Site B Palo Alto Networks. This setting again is coming in from that single panorama management UI. And the installation shows that everything is successful as well. So let's jump right in. Under objects, like I said, where you create dynamic address groups, I start with _NSX_ copy paste the same name as the tag for DB, web servers, and things like that, right? So I'm at the end of the configuration, I'm able to create DB and web, and I'm also creating some policies to allow ping and MySQL type applications between web and DB servers. Again, you notice that everything is placed under a parent DG, and this is being shared by both sites, Site A and Site B. Again, this is an example configuration, and I'm giving the application to be MySQL, ping, Active Directory, whatever you please. Now, at the end of the policy configuration itself, it looks like this. I'm allowing both web to DB, and this is the configuration. I configured everything under parent DG. Now, the step to auto-generate traffic steering rules is very important, because in the previous example, when you had one panorama talking to one NSX manager, it would just be a single line that says, hey, just allow the traffic. But here, it replicates itself, even though I created it just once under parent device group. It replicates it for both Site A device group as well as Site B device groups.
So if you ping right now to Site A, it's going to work. And if you do the same on Site B, it's going to work at the same time.
It's going to work as well.
Why don't you show to us so it will be...
Absolutely. So I'm committing the configuration, and I'm also checking it from NSX Manager. And after I pull in the relevant workloads, you will see the IP address bindings. That's exactly what you were talking about, right? Under Site A, I'm able to, as soon as I pulled in the relevant workloads, I'm able to see all the IP address bindings, so which means that traffic going from web servers to DB servers will be able to talk to each other.
So yeah, your policy is tied to security tags. It's got nothing to do with the IP addresses.
Correct.
On the back end, we are querying and getting all the IP address information automatically.
Automatically. That happens automatically. None of it is programmed or anything. So same thing with Site B as well. As soon as I start pulling in the...
Why don't you jump to the ping and actually show how it actually works out there?
Absolutely. So you saw the IP address bindings. Now I'm starting a ping from web to DB, right? And let's go to Monitor tab and see what happens to the traffic logs. I refresh, and I'm able to see all the traffic getting redirected to Palo Alto SVMs. And now let's try at site B. I'm logging into one of the web servers in site B, and I'm trying to ping. Again, I just configured all the security dynamic address groups and policies just once within Panorama, and I'm able to see it getting reflected both in site A and site B.
So you define the policy in one place, it gets synchronized across multiple sites at any given time, and the security posture is getting enforced in all those locations at the same time.
Absolutely.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Let's shift over to a couple of quick sort of touch points in terms of certification. So a couple of great considerations which we want to urge, and these are more for information standpoint for you, and that is, one is make sure that you are allocating the relevant resources. Remember, high performance comes at the price of allocating more resources. So CPU, memory, make sure you actually identify those based on the data sheets and leverage those before you actually leverage the new instances. Design considerations, you actually have the flexibility now of deploying different models. So for example, you might actually decide to deploy a VM 300, which is at the middle of the pack in terms of the portfolio for your shared cluster environments. But you might decide to deploy a high performance one for your DC edge to deal with your traffic, so on and so forth. So you actually have the flexibility of deploying different versions in your environment. And of course, for certifications, I definitely urge you to go to the website on VMware itself, where we actually keep synchronized with NSX releases, and we certify our software with NSX software releases to make sure that you can pick the right version, actually embark on your project. So with that said, I just want to quickly give a very high-level view of some of the evolving use cases beyond software-defined data center. We talked about all the security aspects which are tied to within your data center. Now, let's talk a little bit about what's actually happening outside your data center. Enterprise perimeter now in public cloud, into software as a service, into VMware Cloud on AWS now. Now, it's a big news which has been coming out since its launch at VMworld US. You have remote locations, you have mobile users. Now, you want to make sure that your security posture is consistent across all this environment. And that's exactly where these two uses are coming to the fore. These are the two common use cases which we are hearing from a large number of customers today. They're very much interested in taking this joint integration between VMware and Palo Alto networks and extending that into multi-cloud environments. Extend this into AWS. Extend this into VMware Cloud and AWS. Extend this into Microsoft Azure. Be able to do this to your remote office and branch office locations. You want to be able to secure your remote office locations in the same fashion the way you're doing data center. One place to manage your security policy, but it gets enforced across your enterprise footprint. Now, these two use cases are definitely becoming very popular. In 12 months, we actually have had proof points where we have had customers do this and actually implement this in their environments. So I'll quickly give a high-level view of what this use case is about. The first one is you have the flexibility now to secure your public cloud environments. We actually, the same virtualized next-generation firewall, which you can spin up your NSX environment, you can spin it up in AWS, you can spin it up in VMC on AWS, you can spin it up in Azure if you wanted. So you can run it anywhere, and it essentially can be managed by the same management platform. So that gives you the flexibility. So you define the security policies in one location, and you start extending them into other locations too. So your corporate security policy is consistent across your environment. So, and similar to that, the branch office environment too, you have the flexibility to integrate with software-defined wide area networking environments, SD-WAN offering vendors. So we actually integrate with a bunch of vendors. So together you can secure your branch office locations too by essentially extending the same security posture. In fact, the security tags which you define in your NSX environment, you can actually take them all the way into your branch locations. Very popularly known as branch in a box. That's sort of the use case which is coming to the fore these days. We've seen a whole bunch of these use cases come out in retail quite a bit. A lot of retail market players are actually this design, because it gives them the ability to define that one single security policy in one place and enforce that everywhere. In summary, I suggest three things. Aside from the fact that we actually have a hands-on lab available to you right here, please, I urge you to take it. You learn a lot from there. I had an expert at our booth in G211 drop by and actually look at the demos, talk to them, learn about what else we're doing. Three things to take away from here. VMware and Palo Alto Networks have strategic partnership, and we have been actually collaborating for the last 5 years on this integration. So it's a very mature, robust integration with lots of customers who have deployed this today. And there are a lot of case studies available for you to go and take a look at in terms of how it's actually being done. Definitely urge you to take a look at that. There are a whole bunch of new features available which actually help you achieve a better security posture. And finally, this offering is available for you today to check out and try it out. And we have versions available. Talk to our account teams, and they'll help you out with getting a trial version available for you. So with that said, there is a benefit for us as well as for you if you take the survey. Please fill out the survey on your mobile apps and provide us feedback so that we can make this session better and better, and hope to see you next year. Thank you so much, and have a great time at VMworld.